It's a mystery that haunts not only Scotland, where it occurred, but people from all across the world. 3 experienced mariners all vanished without a trace, never to be seen again. But a journal had been left behind, allowing investigators to piece together just what had happened. But the journal proved to make things even more haunting and mysterious, and provided all those who examined it with more questions than answers. This episode of Seriously Strange is brought to you in part by Raid: Shadow Legends, an impressive mobile game that's both epic and fun and fairly sexy. This ain't your little sister's mobile game about rescuing puppies by solving puzzles. Raid is wildly popular right now for its intense storyline and incredible graphics. It's hard to believe it could be played right on your phone. If you like RPGs and dark fantasy like I do, then you need to check out this game. Nearly 10 million players worldwide have downloaded it in the past 3 months alone. And check out the ratings, it's unreal. Just look at these graphics, the details, the flat-out sexiness. I'm turned on already, but the best part? It's totally free. In Raid: Shadow Legends, you can collect over 400 unique champions, which include badass characters like orcs, undead, knights, elves, and so much more. You also have the ability to customize your champions, like when choosing artifacts or creating a unique mastery build for each of them to get them super buffed up. Assemble a team and start fighting legendary battles against unique enemies or other players. Plus, there's a fully voiced story campaign. Whether you love collecting characters, taking on other players to make them feel bad about themselves, or if you're like me and you just get all hot and bothered for a sick boss battle, you could play for 5 minutes or 5 hours or 5 days if you struggle with getting addicted to things. So join me and head down into the description below, hit the special links, and you'll get 50,000 silver and a free epic champion as part of the new player program available to my audience, courtesy of Raid. And don't forget about the new highly anticipated Faction Wars, which is live right now, just waiting for you like a mistress waiting by the sea for her lover to return home from catching crabs. You're gonna love it, and you won't get any weird itches or have to use any stinky shampoos. And there's an epic rewards program for new players that will give you a daily login reward every day for the first 90 days in the game. Again, hit those links below and get playing. By doing so, you'll get to support my channel and have a ton of fun yourself. Thanks for listening, and now, on to the episode. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse is something of a marvel for those who know its history. It was constructed between 1895 and 1899 and cost £6,914, the equivalent of which would be nearly £1 million today. The location of the lighthouse isn't easy to get to, never mind to haul materials and equipment to, but that's just what the builders had to do all those years ago. Much of the equipment needed to be hauled up the 148-foot cliffs from boats that were often getting rocked by waves. After more money was invested in the project, the lighthouse was eventually lit for the very first time on December 7th, 1899. It would only be a year before the eerie mystery would sweep in and tarnish the lighthouse's reputation with darkness for countless years to come, as it still looms in the shadows to this day, hiding its secrets within its walls. It was a little over a year later, on December 15th, 1900. A steamer had passed by all the way from Philadelphia in the United States, and it was arriving in poor weather conditions. Thankfully, the weather wasn't nasty enough to cause an accident, but the men aboard the boat were able to spot the lighthouse and noticed that the light wasn't lit. This wasn't only unusual, but deadly, so the men knew something wasn't right. The lighthouse was staffed with 3 mariners, and for not one of them to fulfill the main duty of the lighthouse was bizarre. But the boat wasn't stopping there, so they made a note in their log of the lighthouse being out and went along their way. When the boat eventually docked 3 days later, some of the men from the boat alerted the Northern Lighthouse Board of the lighthouse's status. Due to adverse weather, a relief boat was unable to make it to the lighthouse for 8 days. But once it did, it was an experience no man aboard would ever forget. The three keepers of the lighthouse were named James Ducat, Donald MacArthur, and Thomas Marshall. When the relief crew approached the lighthouse, they immediately knew that something was wrong. Provisions had been left on the landing stage, apparently untouched. The flagstaff had no flag, and no one was coming to greet them. It was as if the lighthouse had been abandoned entirely. And that's exactly what had happened. A man by the name of Joseph Mòr went ashore to check in on what was going on. Upon closer inspection, he discovered that the gates were closed, the beds were unmade, and the clocks were stopped, and no one was to be found inside. When more crew entered to have a look around, the only thing that was noticed to really stand out was a chair at the kitchen table that had been overturned for reasons unknown. The men searched the lighthouse and the island thoroughly, but there was nothing. There wasn't even a trace of the lighthouse keepers. 3 men from the relief crew were left to tend to the lighthouse. While they didn't find any trace of the keepers, they did find some considerable damage to parts of the island as the result of a powerful storm, specifically the west landing. Iron railings were bent, debris was littered everywhere, and even a boulder weighing over a ton had been moved from its place. The rest of the island, however, appeared untouched. The only way to figure out what really happened was to check the log, the last hope any of them had for getting to the bottom of the bizarre and eerie circumstances. The log was kept until 9 a.m. on December 15th, and in it, the keepers had mentioned a great storm on December 12th, the likes of which weren't ever experienced by any of the keepers. In fact, it was so horrific that one of the keepers, James Ducat, went into a state of shock and couldn't speak. Donald MacArthur, known for being a brawler as well as a veteran mariner, sobbed inconsolably, which was entirely outside of his normal character. In fact, inside the lighthouse, Donald's rain gear was left hanging up, while the other 2 had seemingly taken theirs. The keeper who wrote the log entry, Thomas Marshall, said that the storm was more severe than anything he'd seen in 20 years. But these were men that should have seen their fair share of storms in the ocean. They were all experienced and trusted with the task of running the lighthouse. However, this storm was terrifying enough to break them all down. On the 13th, the log read that the storm was still raging on. All the keepers were safe inside. There was no possible way they didn't know that, given all of their experience. But what made this even more bizarre is that when checking the log's final entry, made on December 15th, it stated, "Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all." But the strangeness wasn't over yet. When looking back through the weather records, it was discovered that not a single report of a storm or even adverse weather conditions on the 12th, 13th, or 14th of December even existed at all. This left investigators only more confused, as there seemed to have been some damage from a powerful storm, but there was no report of a storm. It was known to be a particularly decent time in terms of the weather. But even if the storm did occur as the log said, and perhaps it was just highly localized to the specific area, the keepers were there when it had apparently come to an end, writing that it was all over. And yet still, the keepers who had allegedly faced down the most terrifying storm that could send even veteran mariners to the floor trembling were gone, and they've never been found since. No hard evidence of their fates has ever come to surface. In over 100 years after the disappearance of the 3 Flannan Isles Lighthouse keepers, many theories have passed from person to person, many of which were ridiculous, such as claiming that a ship of ghosts abducted the keepers. Stronger theories include that the storm did truly occur, and when the keepers ran to the west landing, where the storm had ravaged the island, they were swept out to sea by the powerful force of the storm. This, of course, conflicts with the final log entry, unless there had been another storm, and that storm hadn't been mentioned in the log at all, which would be highly unlikely. Another theory, which is perhaps the most unsettling of all, is that one of the keepers went insane. It's assumed that in this scenario, the man who went insane would have been Donald MacArthur, due to his history of violence and due to the fact his rain gear was still inside the lighthouse, which was unusual. Also, his breaking down into tears was felt as highly bizarre by those who knew him. But in this theory, it's believed that Donald lost his mind in the lighthouse and, at some point, killed the other two men and disposed of their bodies into the ocean. From there, he may have committed suicide. It's also been speculated that the three men all vanished by their own free will to start new lives. This is highly unlikely considering two of the men were married with children. It's unknown exactly who wrote the final entry in the log, stating that God was over all, but that certainly wasn't the case. Did the storm truly occur? Did Donald perhaps use the storm as a cover to murder the other keepers, and then he wrote in the log that the storm had ended to throw off investigators before he, too, succumbed to the storm? It's likely we'll never know what happened to the lighthouse keepers, but speculation and theories will always circulate freely, but whether any of them carry any merit will likely never be determined. But what do you think happened to the lighthouse keepers? Leave your theory in the comments below. I'll be going through and reading them and look forward to what you think. That's all for this episode. Thank you for watching. Be sure to subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any upcoming episodes of Seriously Strange. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time.